Thank you all for being here. 70 years ago this week, President Roosevelt and the nation celebrated National Brotherhood Week. The idea of Brotherhood Week came from the nonprofit National Conference for Christians and Jews, whose goal was to fight bigotry and racism and injustice. And these goals certainly went hand in hand with the Allied goals for defeating Nazism in Europe and Japanese fascism and racism in expansionist Asia. The presentation we're about to hear connects very strongly with Brotherhood Week, for it discusses four chaplains, one Catholic, one Jew, and two Protestants who gave their lives so that others might live. As John 15:13 says in the New Testament of the King James Bible, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." To share this story of the immortal Four Chaplains and the Dorchester, we are delighted to have with us tonight a true champion of the chaplains and preserving the memory of this story. Judge Barry Sax is a retired administrative judge for the Defense Office of Hearings and Appeals with the Department of Defense, and in this position, he was responsible for processing and deciding more than 1,000 security clearance hearings around the nation and at military bases around the world. Judge Sax is also the former chairman of the Immortal Chaplains Foundation in Long Beach, California, and now serves on the board of the Chapel of the Four Chaplains in Philadelphia. We're proud to host him so that we too can always remember the inspiring story of what these brave souls sacrificed for this country and for our fellow man. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Judge Barry Sax.
Thank you. Wow, how do I top that? Officials and members of the museum, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, as you've just heard, the story of the Four Chaplains has played a major part of my life. I first came to the story more than half a century ago. I was only a teenager in Philadelphia. I belonged to a Jewish fraternity in my old neighborhood of Strawberry Mansion, and the chapter's name was Four Chaplains, AZA. I actually had a jacket in those days with the Four Chaplains logo on it. A long time ago. I came back to this about a dozen years ago when I started to develop my passion for military history and military chaplains in particular. And I followed up on the Four Chaplains, who they were, what they'd done, other military chaplains who had done similar wonderful things. The heading for the first slide tells the story of what I've discovered. Brotherhood and sacrifice at sea, that's what happened, that's the legacy. It's not quite the true story, it's an incomplete, almost true story, because I'm still finding more information, even today, even here today, from people who had relatives who were on board the Dorchester. The Dorchester was just a plain, ordinary ship, one of almost 3,000 ships that were torpedoed in the Atlantic during World War II. Most of the names of the other ships are unknown unless you're a history buff. The Dorchester remains because of what the chaplains did at that time. February 3rd, 1943. The U.S. had been at war since December 7th, 13 to 14 months. We were still learning what to do. We just begun the convoy system escorting ships back and forth between the United States and Eastern Canada and Great Britain and the Soviet Arctic ports. When the Germans invaded Denmark and Norway in April of 1940, the Norwegian fleet, 900 ships, the third largest merchant fleet in the world after the United States and Britain, refused to obey German orders and went to Britain and the United States and became part of the Allied fleet. Denmark owned and still owns today Greenland. I've been to Greenland twice. If you haven't been there, I invite you to go there. It's a wonderful place. Everybody now almost everybody speaks English because nobody else speaks Danish. That's what they tell me, right? So the question is why we were going to Greenland, why we were in Greenland. Because the Danes were afraid that the Germans would occupy Greenland. We were afraid the Danes would occupy Greenland. So we reached an agreement with the U.S., with the Danish ambassador in Washington who happened to be married to an American woman, which we recognize as being the legitimate government of Denmark, to occupy Greenland during the war and protect Greenland against the Germans. So by February 1943, we had close to 5,000 men in Greenland. Garrison forces, Navy forces, so the Navy ships could escort the convoys passing to England, south of Greenland, Coast Guard ships to do the same thing. We supported those bases in Greenland by using the Coast Guard, which had smaller cutters, smaller ships that could not go across the oceans. They were used mostly along the Atlantic coast, some to the Caribbean, but also to Greenland, and smaller, older ships. The convoy, SG-19, means the 19th convoy from Sydney, Nova Scotia. They use that to replace all the ports of origin to Greenland. And coming back, there were GS. This was the 19th convoy. The Dorchester had been there 5 times before. This was the final time, the final version. They never got there. And the story we tell is what happened at the time. That's the background. Let me now ask you to go back in time, if you can, and imagine February 2nd, 1943, not the 3rd, February 2nd, the day before. It's early evening. The sun is long gone, but there's a full moon. The snow and ice that's been hitting this area is gone, but the seas are still rough. There's a chop of maybe 5 or 6 feet. It's 90 miles from Greenland. There's nobody around, but yet there is. The U-223, one of 683 Type 7C U-boats the Germans produced during the war, had just arrived from its break-in cruise in the Baltic Sea. It was part of a 20 U-boat arc of submarines that began in the south, just east of St. John, Newfoundland, and curved to the northwest towards Greenland. The commander of the patrol line assigned the new sub to the place where he thought it would be least likely to get into trouble, because nobody was going to Greenland. They were looking for ships going to England. So this morning, just before it got dark, just before the change of shifts, the lookout on the conning tower took one more look around and saw in the far south a column of smoke. If he hadn't seen that, none of this would have happened. He called the captain, Lieutenant Karl Jörg Wachter, 25 years old, who came up on the deck and saw this column of smoke and realized it was almost certainly not a warship, because warships didn't produce smoke. It had to be a merchant ship of some kind, and it was. He notified German headquarters in France, which then assigned the next 4 U-boats in line to the south to join with the U-223 and attack the convoy. An hour or two later, and things went very slowly, the ships were moving 8 or 9 miles an hour. They were covered with ice, and they were zigzagging. And as they got closer, he could see that there were only 3 ships, including what looked like a larger ship of some kind, the Dorchester, in the center, and 3 Coast Guard cutters. He notified France again, and they said, okay, too much trouble. Only the next 2 ships go join him. So the other ones turned back, and time went by. The convoy began to pass the U-223, which was now all by itself. And the commander decided he had to do something, or the opportunity would be gone, because soon it would reach a band of sea ice that circled Greenland, which was maybe 25 or 30 miles an hour, maybe 3 hours. There was no time. So he waited until the convoy began to pass. First the Coast Guard cutter, then one of the 2 small freighters, and he fired 3 torpedoes. 2 vanished into thin air. We don't know what happened to it. The 3rd struck the Dorchester on the right side in the area of the engine room. And this is a picture of the ship, the Dorchester. This is a stained glass window, which is at it's now in a corridor outside the chaplain's office at the Pentagon, near the 9/11 chapel. The pictures are pretty much what the guys look like. The ship, however, is wrong because it sank bow first, stern first, not the rear. But it's a beautiful picture. The first chaplain on the ship, Lieutenant Rabbi Chaplain Alexander David Good, born in Brooklyn, New York. His father was a rabbi in Washington Hebrew congregation. He was an athlete and a scholar. And as early as 1934, he wrote an article which his widow gave to me a few years before she died, in which he predicted great danger to the Jews in Germany. But he also predicted the utter destruction of Germany. What a prescient guy this was. He really had an idea of what was happening. He volunteered for the Navy in 1940, but they didn't want him. They didn't have a need for him at the time. So he waited. After Pearl Harbor, he volunteered again, this time with the Army, and he was immediately accepted. Part of this, what I realized, is a series of coincidences. This is the first one of 4 men who never knew of each other's existence before, from different parts of the country, from different religions, who after Pearl Harbor instantaneously and independently made a decision to join, to become chaplains. George L. Fox, an interesting man. He was born in 1900. He was the grandfather, or the old man of the group. He was 43 years old at the time. He had actually served in World War I. He lied about his age and became a combat medic because he was small and young. He drove an ambulance onto the fields in northern France and rescued Americans and Frenchmen who had been damaged by either gunfire or by gas. And on several occasions, he took off his own gas mask and put it on the people he was saving to save their lives. So he got several medals at 16, or he was 17 then, and the French Legion of Merit. He came back from the war, became clergy, and again decided he couldn't stand by. This time he wanted to join the Army after Pearl Harbor and volunteered, and he too was accepted. Clark V. Poling. For the chaplains, his father, Daniel Poling, was one of the leaders of American Protestant Christianity in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And his son also became a minister. He was born in Columbus. When he decided to join, he went to his father and said, I can't join as a chaplain. I have to go fight. And his father convinced him because his father had fought in World War I. It's just as dangerous, or even more dangerous, to be a chaplain because you don't carry weapons. So he volunteered as a chaplain, and he too was accepted. The last one, John P. Washington, St. Stephen's Church in Kearney, New Jersey, just west of Newark. I was there 3 weeks ago. There's a stained glass window for him. They've renamed the street in front of the church after him. There's a statue now in front of the church of the Four Chaplains on board a model of the Dorchester. He wears glasses. Interesting guy. He was a boy of the streets in Newark, a tough kid. He got into trouble. And he had to wear glasses because at one time he fired a BB gun at himself and it hit his eye. And they wouldn't let him in service, but the older priest at the church, Father Burns, who had also joined, told him how to pass the physical by lying about what he was seeing. And nobody caught it, so he joined, even though he wears thick glasses. Here's the Dorchester. This is a picture of what it looked like before the war. It was built in 1926 by Newport News Shipbuilding as a coastal steamer. It would go from Baltimore to Miami in the winter and from Baltimore to Boston in the summer. The bottom was with commercial, the front, it held like 200 people on the decks that you see, and the dining room was just below the deck in the center of the ship. This is the same ship in May of 1942, tied up at the dock at the command base Bluey West 1 at a place called Narsasawak in southwestern Greenland. Right across, didn't mean to do that. The size of the ship, you can see because here's the truck and here's 2 men standing. It's not a very big ship, but it had 902 men on board during this trip, including 505 Army garrison troops who were heading to Greenland. Notice the mountain in the back here and the dock. Oops, hold it. I didn't include one. I have a picture of the boat at the picture of the dock 6 years ago. In place of the Dorchester, there's an iceberg, but it's still there, so it's easy to see what had happened. This is the type 7C U-boat like the U-223. 685 rather were built during the war out of like 900 that were commissioned. Most of them were destroyed. The only one still in existence now is in the harbor of Kiel, Germany. And the Norwegians had captured it after the war and kept it and finally gave it back to the Germans. Now it's a museum. They cut the doors in the hull and you can go inside and see how small the darn thing was. Yet they're really small. This is the commander, Karl-Jörg Wachter, of the U-223. He started in the Army, transferred to the Navy when they were increasing the size of the submarine fleet, was a smart guy. He died 2 days before the war ended. He was in command of a new submarine, a Type 23, and was ordered by Admiral Dönitz to escape to Norway, which was still under German control. But he was caught in the open in the islands of Denmark, and the boat was destroyed, and he died. The U-223 was itself destroyed in 1944 off of northwest of Sicily by British destroyers. So they're now part of the history. I was able to meet two of the Germans of the three who survived the war. One has now passed away. The third one, the executive officer of the U-223, whose name was Hans Buske, is still alive. He came back from the war in 1947, got into the German film industry and produced a son who had a grandson. And when I met Buske 6 years ago at a Immortal Chaplains Foundation program in St. Paul, Minnesota, he brought his grandson with him. And the son played the piano. Well, I'm not musical, my good daughters are, my wife is, and my oldest daughter, has a musical group that's on the internet. So I brought the boy upstairs and opened up the internet and showed him my daughter playing. And it occurred to me that here was this young boy, marvelous at playing the piano, who would not have been there if his father had died, like so many of the others did. So then it occurred to me to ask then, what have we lost? We lost 410,000 men and women during the war, close to 300,000 of whom were combat related. Some died, others survived. What was the difference? What have we lost? If you know British history, you know that the loss of the best and brightest during the First World War probably hindered Great Britain mightily in the decades that came. But this is where we came to. Here's the Coast Guard cutter Comanche. I think it's actually shorter than 192 feet. There were actually three cutters. The Tampa, the command cutter, which was bigger, escorted the other two freighters to the base in Greenland. The commander of the Tampa then ordered the Escanaba to pick up people in the water from the Tampa, and for the Comanche to screen the Escanaba against the submarine. So the Escanaba had a man on board named Lieutenant Robert Prowse, who had developed what he called a retriever suit, a rubber suit that you put a rope or a tether to the back. The guy would wear it, jump in the water, grab somebody, and they would pull him back to the boat. Somebody would take him out of the boat and put him up on the Comanche, on the Escanaba. The Comanche didn't have that. The Comanche rescuers went down rope ladders into boats, tied up at the bottom, and reached into the water and pulled people out. The sea was rough. People were getting soaked. It was freezing, near freezing. People died. With us today is my friend Dick Swanson, who was one of the last, as far as I know, the last two surviving rescuers from the Comanche, and I'm going to be interviewing Dick at the conclusion of the program. It's quite a story. We're glad to have him, honored to have him with us. This is the Escanaba. The Escanaba and the Comanche, I think, were originally used on the Great Lakes for light ice breaking and to guard ships and do rescue work on the Great Lakes, and were moved to the Atlantic just before the beginning of the war and converted to ocean service. They became part of the Navy. And I understand that at that time, the Coast Guard people had a choice of wearing either the darker Navy uniforms or keep their lighter blue Coast Guard uniforms. So it was a question, it could identify you. If you wanted to be kept separate, you wore a Coast Guard uniform. If you wanted to be part of the Navy, you could wear a dark uniform. Now here's the Tampa. This was an older ship built in 1921. The others were built in 1932. This is the one of the two freighters leased from the Norwegian government in exile. They're both about the same size, the Lutz and the Biscaya. And we don't know which one of these was producing the smoke that attracted the attention of the submarine. This is a map of southern Greenland. Well, you can see the laser beam. Right here it says Narsak. This is where the submarine, where the Louis West One is. And right down here is where the destruction of the Dorchester took place. A little bit further would have been safe. The commander of the Dorchester, man in charge of the Army troops, Preston Prepper, right, told his people, you make through this night, you're okay. I want you to sleep in your suits, put your life jacket on, and we'll be okay in the morning. It was hot down below. Again, another coincidence. If you were young and, I don't want to say stupid, but not taking advice, you got out of their clothes, took off their life jacket, and went to sleep. 1 o'clock in the morning, crash. A lot of them were killed instantaneously by the explosion. The rest of them tried to get up on the deck as quickly as they could. The Four Chaplains, as well as a lot of Army Air Force people, were on the cabins on the deck. And they were came on deck, and the officers had their uniforms on, had their life jackets on. When the Four Chaplains came out on deck, they saw young men coming out. They tried to calm them. They tried to help them off the ship. There were compartments on the deck holding more life jackets, so they opened those up and gave them out. All this happened in 15 minutes. The whole thing took 20 minutes when the ship sank. And shortly before the end, the life jackets ran out, and the Four Chaplains again, coincidentally, took up their own life jackets and gave them to the next 4 men in line, knowing that by giving these men a chance to live, they were in fact guaranteeing their own death. And that's the heroism that has made them part of our legacy. As it turns out, they're not the only men that have done something like that. 4 days later, another troop ship called the Henry T. Mallory was sunk off of Iceland. On that Mallory, there were 7 chaplains, 7. 5 of them died. Hardly anybody knows their names. And I've talked to 2 of the relatives of the 2 who survived, and it turns out that somebody had said that one of the chaplains who died had come on deck with his life jacket and was about to get in a lifeboat when he turned around and said, I have to go help my friends get out of below deck. And he went down below into the hold and never appeared again. That's the same kind of heroism. So chaplains can do wonderful things because they're wonderful people, and putting other people ahead of themselves and putting other people's safety ahead of them is one of the attributes of a good person and a good chaplain. I'm not sure what the word is, but we've been asked over the years, what happened to the people that got the life jackets on Dorchester? What happened? Did they survive? Over the years, a few people came forward and said they were the ones who got the jacket, but it turned out they weren't. To this day, it appears that the 4 men who got the life jackets themselves died in the water. So their act was an act of futility in a sense, but no less magnificent in what they were trying to do. The water at the time was near freezing, the air was near freezing. Psychologists and doctors will tell you that in that kind of condition you would die in 20 to 30 minutes. Some of the men picked up by the Comanche, which only came onto the scene like an hour or 2 later, had survived, even though they were entirely or partially in the water. If you were in a rowboat and dry, you survived. If you were on a raft and barely dry, you could survive. If you were partly in the water and partly on a raft or in a boat, you might survive depending on your body size, how much clothing you have on, how far out of the water you were. But if you were in the water, totally submerged and wet, without protection, Most of them died, but a few survived for an hour or more and were taken to the base hospital in Greenland. So it's really a matter of luck. So all these coincidences come together. I'm always astounded when I think about it. If one thing had changed, this wouldn't have happened. If the Dorchester had left New York, Staten Island an hour later, it wouldn't be where it was in this date. If the ship had been slightly off to one side, or if the U-223 had been slightly away to the east, it wouldn't have seen the smoke. It was possible that the third torpedo might have missed also, but it hit, and absolutely the worst place. As the boat immediately began to list, most of the lifeboats on the left side, the port side, became unusable. Others had been destroyed by the blast. Only 2 of them really got into the water. And my friend Ben Epstein, who passed away just a few months ago, was one of the survivors who came with a friend of his, George Pucciarelli, came out of the room. They were Army Air Force, so they were actually safe. They had their life jackets on. They were on the deck in one of the cabins. And Pucciarelli says, I can't swim, and Ben said, don't worry, just follow me, you'll be okay. So Epstein jumped in the water and swam about 15 feet to a life raft and turned around, and his friend was gone. He had no idea what happened to him. And a year or 2 ago, I got a phone call from somebody who identified herself as a relative of George Pucciarelli. Did I know anything about him? And I said, oh my God, yes I do. So I put her together with Ben Epstein, and they shared their stories. Fascinating. The survivors of the Dorchester were taken to the base in Greenland. They got off the ship at that dock I showed you previously. They were put into ambulances and taken up about 2 miles from the dock, past the airport, to this valley, now it's called Hospital Valley. At one time, in 1943, there were 250-bed hospital built here, 188th Station Hospital, 26 buildings, all connected. Cantonment, they call it, because it was very cold. This way you could go from building to building without going outside in the wintertime. This is all that's left. This was in the officers' club in the administration building. It was too much trouble to tear it down. The Norwegians came in years later and, for the salvage value, took everything away. If you walk there today, you can still see on the ground pipes, ceiling tiles, floor tiles. Nothing disintegrates because of the weather. And I sat there for about an hour just watching this and letting the history roll over you, the things that must have happened. In 1948, Congress issued this postage stamp, and sometimes you hear of the chapel of the Four Chaplains. You hear them referred to as the Four Chaplains. Another time you hear them referred to as these Immortal Chaplains. This is where the Immortal Chaplains words come from the postage stamp. And again, the pictures are sort of stylized, but they look sort of like the chaplains did. Last year, this is Arlington National Cemetery. If you've been there, this is a place called Chaplain's Hill. There have been for many years the tablet on the left is for all the chaplains who died in World War I. The second from the left are Protestant chaplains, the third are Catholic chaplains. And the fourth was just inaugurated, was Jewish chaplains who died since World War II. And Chaplain Fox is at the top left of this list. And now the names of Father Washington and Chaplains Fox and Poling are on the left. So now all three of these men are together in history, close to each other. And when I was there for the ceremony, just behind here is another monument for General William A. Allen. If you haven't heard of his name, he was the Chief of Army Chaplains during World War II. And he was the chaplain who assigned the Four Chaplains to go to Greenland on the Dorchester on that fateful day 70 years ago. So again, the history is there. It makes an amazing story. It's a little fuzzy when it's blown up, Wendy. Okay. This is Ernie Heaton, who just passed away again 4 or 5 months ago, the second last surviving man from the Dorchester. He lived in Florida, and I was down there a year and a half ago. They built a Four Chaplains memorial on the beach at Sebastian, Florida, just south of Vero Beach, where he lived. Great guy. This is Ben Epstein. Here he is on top, is 23 years old in the Army Air Force. This is a year or two ago, just before he passed away. A good friend. This is the dedication to the Jewish Chaplains Memorial in Arlington Cemetery. There's Ernie again in the center with his nurse behind him. And the dedication ceremony, we had a number of chaplains and politicians from all over the country who were interested in this. This is from my friend Dick Swanson. Belatedly, but not too late, he received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. At the time he got a certificate, but now he received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, as did somebody we've now discovered also, Joseph Vitale from Pittsburgh, who was also one of the rescuers from the Comanche, who saved people from the Dorchester. So the story continues to evolve. The more we get into this, the more we discover, and the more we talk, the more people we talk to, the more people say, wait a second, I know something about this. And so we're accumulating more and more documents. The National Archives is there. The chaplains in Fort Jackson, South Carolina have a lot of additional material there. And this is the West Point men's choir, although there are several women in this, at the ceremony, right? So what we have then is the moment in history that has passed. Oh, okay. But not passed. I tried to tell you about where these men came from. I've showed you now what happened to them 7 years ago. And more importantly now, I think, is what's happening today. The legacy of these four men, interfaith, courage, interfaith in action, brotherhood, courage, self-sacrifice, is a legacy that is so vibrant that it has attracted my attention and it consumed a lot of my energy and others like me for a number of years. We're teaching it to younger people at schools. 3 weeks ago, I was at the Coast Guard Chapel at Fort Wadsworth on Staten Island, and then at St. Adalbert School in Kearney, New Jersey, where they actually have a ceremony every year on Four Chaplains Week. And the kids there learn the story. Not so much about the four men, which are centered to it, but the rationale, the reason they did what the legacy is. So these kids will grow up knowing the value of honor, duty, country, dignity, and a respect for the rights of others. So the chaplains are examples of that, and I'm happy to be here at the World War II Museum because I've had audiences almost as big, but not quite. And I know there are people here that know something more about the story, and I ask you, if you do know more, let me know. Or if you're interested in finding out more information, I can be reached through the museum. I'm in California, but we have members, well, on the East Coast, but nobody right here as far as I know. At that point, then, I would thank you for attending and listening, and if there's any questions you have, feel free now, and then I'm going to call somebody up to the stage. Any questions?
You mentioned in
Yes.
college you got interested because you were in a group called
Yes.
Four Chaplains. Tell us a little bit more about that group. I don't know if I heard
It was just the boys' fraternity.
you. Fraternity.
Yeah, a neighborhood fraternity in Strawberry Mansion in Philadelphia. And I had no idea. I joined after it was formed, so I joined. I got the jacket. In Philadelphia at the time, in 1950, the Chapel of Four Chaplains was originally built by Daniel Poling, the father of Chaplain Poling, and the Kresge Foundation in a church building near Temple University on North Broad Street. It survived there for many years. The building was decayed and was going to be torn down, so they moved to Valley Forge. And finally, they got a long-term lease for $1 at the Philadelphia Navy Yard in the base chapel. And that's where we are now. It turns out the building wasn't torn down, and it's still available now for functions for rent. So, but the history is there. The chapel has, the original chapel had an altar with a revolving altar, Catholic, Jewish, and Protestant, that you could turn around for whatever faith was there, or you could rotate it whenever a program was going on. It's our intention now to repair it, put it back in shape, and we're going to offer it to the World War II Museum to be presented or shown in the new exhibit that's going to be done in the Liberation Building in 2 or 3 years. Okay. I would like to introduce at this time my friend Richard Swanson from Nebraska. Richard, can you come up? Dick, you are, although you're still a youngster, you're a living museum. I told you that, okay.
Well, I guess I'm that old.
Okay. I know your story, but I want you to tell the people, first of all, how did you come to be in the Coast Guard?
Well, it's one of those things when you grow up in the Midwest and you don't know anything about the sea or the Navy, and it's just kind of intrigued you. They had a recruiting drive, and I just jumped on board from Omaha, Nebraska, and joined the Coast Guard in August 10th of 1940.
And what happened in 1940? What happened then?
After I joined, I went to Port Townsend, Washington, and went to boot camp and learned, I guess, there a whole lot about the Coast Guard. Of course, the main thing is they're a rescuing organization. We went out and we rescued a lot of small boats that were at sea and people like that. That was our big thing, was to rescue.
And where were you assigned? When were you assigned to the Comanche?
Well, I went to the East Coast, and I was assigned to Comanche in 1943, and was on board almost 3 years.
So was this the episode with the Dorchester, your first voyage on the Comanche?
No, we had been at sea a few times before that, and we were on escort duty. We were an icebreaker. We had 16 inches of steel in our bow, so they had assigned us to Greenland to open up the ice to bring the ships into Greenland, up the fjords where there was a lot of heavy ice.
How many times had you been there?
Up Greenland?
Yes.
Oh, about 6 times probably at least.
And tell us what you remember of the episode involving the Dorchester in February of 1943. Where were you?
We were on the port side of the convoy, and I was a sonar operator, the underwater sound, and I was on the sound, and I heard the explosion, and I reported it, and and where it was a torpedo had hit the Dorchester, and all of a sudden all the lights came on the Dorchester, and that's where they could see where it was. And she sank in about 15 minutes, I think it was, something like that after. But we went and we picked up a lot of the survivors from the life rafts. We went down over the side. We threw a cargo net over our ship over the side. We went down and helped the survivors get up and hauled them up by lines or hand held them up.
Let me back up for a moment and ask you about Charles W. David, Jr. Who was he?
Well, he was an African-American boy, a huge fellow, big and happy and jolly, and he played harmonica, and I had a sax on board, my alto sax, so we'd get together and down in the office, and he'd get out his harmonica and we'd jam. So we got to be real good friends. And we'd go ashore together, and we'd say, well, let's go to Harlem. He said, no, you can't go up there. Well, let's go up to 52nd Street. No, we can't go there because I can't go in those places. We'd have to hunt for someplace to go.
Tell us about what happened with you and Mr. David on the morning of February 3rd, 1943.
Well, when the ship was hit, well, he was a big man, and he was a tower of strength. He just kept going down over the side and hauling up survivors, and he just wouldn't quit. He just kept going on, and finally he was so exhausted that he had to give up. And
What kind of clothing were you wearing, or was he wearing at the time?
well, we were in our jeans, our blue jeans, and coats, and I guess the thing I remember the most about the night was the cold and getting wet, and it was just and the seas. They were 6 to 8 foot seas coming in, and the water splashing on you, and you got soaked, and it was flat cold, as they say in Texas.
Okay. Do you recall how many men that you pulled out of the water?
Oh gosh, I don't remember. Probably 15 or 20 of our group, and then altogether, I think we got about 80 or 90 on the Comanche. They sent us out first to hunt for the sub, and I talked to one of the executive officer of the sub, and we had a reconciliation ceremony years later, and he called me a boom boom Swanson because we had dropped depth charges on them, and they that actually kept them away from the rest of the convoy, and they went down on the bottom and just laid there. So we weren't able to get the sub, but they finally got away, and eventually.
Okay. I should tell you that from researching the records, the Escanaba was assigned, I think I may have indicated, to pick up survivors because they had these rescue suits. The Comanche was supposed to cover the Escanaba, but the submarine, the captain, it was his first cruise, he was a lucky one shot, he went deep and left the area. So the Comanche was searching for somebody who was no longer there, and eventually, and I don't know if you know this, but again, the records show that the captain of the Comanche finally disobeyed orders because he couldn't stand by and let men die. So he left his screening position and went back to where the people were in the water, and that's why the Comanche got there when he did. And it turns out then that the commandant up in the Tampa, around the same time, had decided to change his mind and ordered the Comanche to go, but it was already done before the order was given. Now, Mr. David jumped in the water, right?
Yes.
Did
Yes,
you?
He did.
Okay. What did he look like when he came out?
Wet.
Well,
Very wet.
and what happened? What did the two of you do once everybody was brought onto the Comanche?
Well, I'm sorry.
What happened to you? Did you get dry and warm?
Oh well, yeah. We went on up to Greenland, and the ambulances. The Army sent down ambulances and got the men and all those that were off the ship that needed to go up to the hospital.
Did you see him leave the ship? And
Mm-hmm.
you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, he died a few days after that of pneumonia.
And again, from looking at the records, he spent 6 weeks in the base hospital in Greenland and died of pneumonia. And he was buried in the base hospital in Greenland until the end of the war. In National Archives, I found the records for the cemetery, and sure enough, there's his name, and I think it's in space 32. After the war in 1947, the cemetery was closed and all the bodies were returned to the United States. Apparently, though, his family was not informed. So he was buried in Long Island National Cemetery in Farmingdale, an hour or so west of New York, out in the middle of Long Island. And his family lived in the Bronx. And the Immortal Chaplains Foundation gave Mr. David a gold medal in 1999.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
That since nobody knew where his family was, you kept it.
Yes.
And then in 2004, 2005, you decided you wanted to give it to the Coast Guard.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we met them there. Well, I took it down to Cape May, and they came, and so I was able to present that to
So we got involved,
his widow.
and I was able to find his family using VA records, the VA cemetery records. There are 8 or 9 Charles Davids listed, but only one that matched his birth date and February 3, 1943, and said Coast Guard. So I did some further checking, and I found out that one of his family was still getting benefits. Lived in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, so I contacted her. It was her. Her cousin, Charles David's cousin, was living nearby. His widow was living in Birmingham, Alabama, and a granddaughter was in Annapolis, Maryland. So we brought them all to the Coast Guard Training Center in Cape May, and great moment for me was putting Dick together with the members of the David family so he could tell them what had happened to their family member, and they could tell him what David had been like before he left in 1943. So, and we've been friends ever since.
Yeah.
What is this medal? What is the medal you have on?
What's the medal?
Oh, this medal is what is the medal?
Navy and Marine Corps medal. We know that.
It's the Navy Marine Corps.
It's the Navy Marine Corps medal, and my wife made me. She put it on me. And I don't wear medals well at all.
And I should point out that between the Comanche and the Escanaba, the men identified as being rescuers are listed in official reports. And there are perhaps between the two ships maybe 24 men who risked their own lives to go into boats, go into water, and rescue people from the Dorchester. So there are a lot more heroes there that we don't really know about. But I'm writing in a book now, and I'm going to list all the names. Everybody should know who they were and what they did. And you survived to tell the story, and I'm glad, right?
Well, I am too.
I'm just happy to be here.
And lastly, just for his family's sake, what has your life been like since then? How did you meet your wonderful wife, and I know you have a great family.
Oh yeah, we've got there. Some of them are here tonight. We have a mixed family, his, hers, and theirs. So we adopted our nieces and our nephew, and so we have a great family, a whole bunch of kids. I don't know how many grandkids and great grandkids. I can't keep track of them, but we enjoy them all.
So lastly, I would remind you, he survived. Look what happened because he survived. What would have happened if the other men and women who died in service had survived, and why we need to be very careful with the way we treat them and protect them while they're protecting us. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll conclude the program.
Yeah, I think we have a couple questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And I'm going to ask the first one. I wanted you to share, Judge Sax, the letter that you showed me from President Truman in 47, I believe December of 47. Could you explain what that letter was about and what his interest in the Four Chaplains was?
He was very interested in the story of the Four Chaplains because he was involved in Brotherhood. He was the president who desegregated the armed forces. He wrote a letter. Well, we have a copy of it here. It's in the back. Okay, it's in the back, right. It's sort of self-explanatory. When I read it, I said, this is something everybody should read because this was 1947, all those years ago, saying what I think are the right things to say under these circumstances. And again, perhaps we should read that and consider how we should act towards each other in today's world.
I wanted to, my name is Bob Duville. I'm a retired Coast Guard officer. I wanted to ask about David.
Yep.
Was he a steward or a commissaryman? Do you know?
He was a mess steward.
Yeah.
And I think he also was assigned to a gun during, is that what you asked? What did he do during a combat tour?
Just some perspective. In those days, that was about the only rate
Yes.
that was open to the black man.
Actually, he was the captain's mess attendant. He
Steward.
served the captain, so that's what he was on the ship.
Was he the only man who died of his disease or of his illnesses as a result of the rescue?
That's what I've learned. You hear the question? Was he the only one who died from the rescuers?
I think so. I don't recall anyone else at the time.
And finally, was there any? I'm interested in how it came about that that Mr. Swanson got the Navy Marine Corps Medal in 2009. Did you have a role in that?
No. They finally got around to recognizing what he had done. At the time, only a few of the rescuers got the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. Mr. David was one of them. That was a special case because with all the heroism we're talking about, jumping in the water and pulling people out wearing a regular outfit was astounding. It's not quite equivalent to jumping on a hand grenade, but pretty close. And he was the only one that I'm aware of that died. In fact, I'm pretty sure he was, because otherwise we would have heard more from the hospital. And he's the only one who was known to have died as a result of this.
Actually, our commanding officer had written a letter to the commandant of the Coast Guard, and I recommended 10 people in that letter for some type of a recommendation or some type of honor. And out of the 10, 6 received the Navy Marine Corps Medal at that time, and the other 4, I think they took every other name on that list and gave them the Marine Corps Medal, and then they finally, I picked up the other 4 here just a couple of years ago, and I was in that other 4 of the names.
So that error of judgment has finally been made good after all these years.
Judge Sax, during
Yes,
your talk, I was doing the math. 2 lifeboats picked up survivors or got off the ship. 2 cutters picked up people. I assume about 300 people survived out of
227.
1,000 plus. And 1,000 or more were on the ship, right?
902.
Okay, no.
Sorry. 670 died, and I figured out from records at the time and early publications the names of people that lived and those who died. And the numbers came out pretty close. Some people said 904, but most of them, including the official records, say 902 men on the ship and 675 who died. We're pretty sure who was rescued because they counted them when they got off the ship.
Actually, the only ones that really survived were the ones that were in the 2 lifeboats that got off and the life rafts. We sailed through, I keep thinking and saying, acres of men in the water and their lights were on. Their little red lights were on their life preservers, which meant that they were alive when they hit the water and they turned on the lights. But we stopped every so often to see if any were alive. But all of those that were in the water were all gone. So we went through a lot of them that we weren't able to save, of course.
And may I just add also, when the military chaplains exhibit is completed here in 2 or 3 years, depending on how much money we raise, we're going to provide the exhibit with not only part of the altar that I talked about, but with also a life jacket from World War II and one of the red lights that were on the life jackets. And we have relatives of the men on the ship who survived who have other artifacts, I guess you can call them, that we're going to try and get them to provide also to the museum. So there'll be a lot of stuff here. Anybody else?
If there's no more questions, the second to last order of business is to do the drawing here, and we're going to ask our World War II veteran to pull a name out. I do believe I promised to Coastie that he or she would win, so you better pull it. Eric Weaver? That is rigged. Who is Eric Weaver, Mr. Swanson? Do you want to explain who Eric is?
It's my grandson. I didn't see the name when I pulled it out.
Well, that's fitting. Judge Sax, Mr. Swanson, thank you very much. And let me bring this to you, Eric. Wait, they all say Eric Weaver in here.
Can I take this? Oh, okay.
Well, what a wonderful and inspirational evening, recounting and reliving one of the most inspirational and inspiring stories of World War II. So thank you so much, Judge Sax and Mr. Swanson. This was a very memorable evening for everyone here. A tragic but uplifting story, one of interfaith collaboration in wartime. Interestingly, as the museum was planning its expansion as the World War II Museum some 8 or 9 years ago, we missed the spiritual dimension of World War II in our master planning, but we revised that plan, and we have a place in the future, an interfaith chapel, an exhibition that will be in our Liberation Pavilion. The Board of Trustees, led by our chairman and other trustees, agreed that we ought to do something to reflect on the spiritual dimension of the war, how important the chaplains were to those who lived as well as those who died. And so we have a wonderful chapel and a place for the chaplain story of World War II, as well as the Immortal chaplains in the final building that we will hope to complete by 2016. We are beginning to raise funds for this final exhibition hall, which will have that story as well as the legacy of World War II from 1945 until to the present. So that is the building or the pavilion that will keep the story of the sacrifice and the service and the American spirit that prevailed during that time. And this chapel will be a place of gathering and meditation and reflection on the spirituality, both then and today, and will be a focal point for the role of faith in World War II. And as I said, this story that you heard tonight, or a part of it, will be told there. Judge Sax has been a valuable ally in the brainstorming and the planning phases for this chapel and this exhibit. I want to thank him for that effort, which inspired us all to stretch a little bit further to bring this story to future generations. So now, as we conclude the program, I want to just mention some of the exciting programs ahead that you may want to attend. Our next distinguished lecture series, the Mason Lecture Series, will take place in a couple of weeks, featuring Dr. Arthur Herman and his book, Freedom's Forge, How American Business Produced Victory in World War II. And his presentation will be on March 14th. I think there are flyers over here somewhere. Jeremy, where are they? Over here. So please pick one of these up, and hope you come. It's an extraordinary story of another way in which America rallied, and an untold story, I think, of the arsenal of democracy and those who left the leadership positions in General Motors and other major companies of World War II to come to the aid of their country, giving up their jobs, and many of them working for $1 a year to help us solve the problems of production and to create that arsenal of democracy that we so much take for granted these days, but was by no means a sure thing in 1940-41. So I want you to spread the word. It's an exciting presentation, I'm sure, in store for all of us, and tell your friends and relatives. And thank you again, Judge Sax and Dick Swanson, for being here and for your service to our country and for sharing your story. So good night to all of you, and thank you for being here. And join me one more time in a round of applause.